Silas Thorne didn't mind the rain. Rain didn't ask questions. Rain didn't remind him of the fires in Tennessee or the way the skin on a man's hands felt after 3 days of holding a hot Springfield rifle. His face was a map of hard winters and harder choices. He was alone, just the way he'd spent the last 15 years on this patch of high country dirt. He was finishing the evening rub down on his mare, Big Red, when the wind shifted. It wasn't the wind that caught his attention. It was the smell, copper, fresh blood, and a metallic tang of fear that no amount of rain could wash away. He reached for the shotgun leaning against the hay bales, a twin-barrel 12-gauge that had seen more use than his Bible. He didn't cock it yet. Out here, the sound of a hammer drawing back was a death sentence or an invitation. He waited. Then, the side door of the stable groaned. A shadow fell across the straw, thin and trembling. She didn't walk in so much as she collapsed. A young woman, barely 20, wearing a dress that had once been blue but was now the color of a bruise. Her hair was matted with burrs and mud, but it was a wrist that made Silas's stomach turn into a cold knot. They weren't just bruised. They were raw, deep, jagged circles where rusted iron had bitten into the bone. She had run a long way in those chains. "Please," she whispered. The word was a dry rattle in her throat. Silas didn't move. He'd seen traps before. He'd seen men use a wounded bird to lure a wolf out of the brush. He scanned the tree-lean through the open door. Nothing but the gray curtain of a storm. He stepped forward, the straw crunching under his boots. He knelt beside her, his joints popping like dried kindling. He reached out to check her pulse, but as his hand moved, she flinched so hard she hit the wooden slats of the stall. "I ain't gonna hurt you, girl," Silas said. His voice was like a shovel hitting gravel. He hadn't used it in 3 days. "But you're bleeding out on my floor. That a mess I don't care to clean." He saw it then. A deep, jagged splinter was buried in her shoulder, likely from a fall through the brush. It was festering. Her skin was burning with a fever that usually ended in a pine box. Silas carried her to the back of the stable, where he kept a small stove and a cot for the nights when the Maras were foaling. He didn't take her to the house. The house was for memories. The stable was for work. He built a fire, the cedar smoke filling the rafters. He boiled water in a tin cup and pulled a clean rag from his kit. Then he reached for the small bottle of rock gut whiskey he kept for emergencies. "This is going to bite," he muttered. She looked at him, her eyes wide, green, and clouded with pain. She saw the whiskey. She saw the heavy, calloused hands of the man over her. Silas gripped her shoulder, his fingers like iron bands. He had to keep her still. If he missed a splinter, he'd tear the artery. "Don't stop," she gasped, her voice breaking as the whiskey hit the open wound. She arched her back, her fingers clawing at the rough wool of the cot. "I need this. I need out." Silas tightened his grip. He wasn't being cruel. He was being an anchor. He held her down, his heart thudding against his ribs. It was the first time he'd touched another human being in 5 years. The warmth of her skin felt alien to him. "Steady," he hissed. "Just a bit more." With a quick, practiced motion, he used a pair of clean pliers to jerk the splinter free. She let out a jagged cry that was swallowed by the roar of the thunder outside. He didn't let go immediately. He watched her breathe. Shallow, fast, like a hunted deer. "My name is Clara," she whispered, her eyes finally finding his. "Names don't matter much when the fever's on you," Silas replied, though his grip softened. He began to wrap her shoulder in clean linen. "What matters is who's following those chains you left behind." She didn't answer. The way she looked at the stable door told Silas everything he needed to know. Someone was coming, and they weren't coming for a chat. This part is getting interesting. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comment. Silas Thorne knew that in the West, mercy was a luxury that usually got a man buried in an unmarked grave. But some debts aren't written in ledgers. They're written in the soul. If you're still here with us, listening to the rain hit the roof of that stable, you're the kind of soul who knows that the real fight is only just beginning. Do us a favor. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Out here in the territories, We don't let our neighbors stand alone against the storm. Leave a comment and tell us. Would you have opened your door to a stranger with chains on her wrists, knowing the devil himself was likely following her trail? Now, let's get back to Blackwood Valley, where the quiet is about to be broken. Clara slept for 4 hours. Silas didn't. He sat on a 3-legged stool by the stable door, whittling a piece of hickory into a point. He watched the rain turn to a fine mist. He thought about the men who used iron chains on women. He'd seen them in the war. The regulars. Men who used the chaos of the frontier to hide the fact that they were nothing more than rabid dogs. Later that night, Clara stirred. Silas handed her a cup of coffee, black, bitter, and strong enough to jumpstart a dead horse. "They're the Miller brothers," she said, her voice steadier now. "They have a work camp 3 ridges over, mining gold that doesn't belong to them. They use people until they break. Then they bury the pieces." "The Millers," Silas nodded. He knew the name. Mean, greedy, backed by a crooked marshal in the next county. "Why you? I saw where they hid the ledger. The real one, the one that shows the senator is on their payroll." She reached into the lining of her torn dress and pulled out a small, leather-bound book. Silas looked at the book. It looked like a death warrant. "You should have kept running, Clara," Silas said softly. "I couldn't. I wanted to see the sun one more time without a collar around my neck." Silas stood up. He walked over to a heavy wooden chest at the back of the stable. He pushed aside a pile of old horse blankets and pulled out a long, heavy object wrapped in oilcloth. He unwrapped it, a Sharps buffalo rifle, .50 caliber. It was a weapon meant for stopping things that didn't want to be stopped. "You know how to use one of these?" Silas asked. "My father taught me to hunt," she said. "Good, because out here, the hunters are about to become the gathered." For the next 3 days, the ranch was a tomb. Silas didn't cut wood. He didn't check the traps. He just sat, watching. He cleaned the Sharps. He cleaned his Colt Navy. He cleaned the 12-gauge. He and Clara didn't talk much. They shared stew made from dried beef and hardtack. They shared the silence. It was a different kind of quiet than Silas was used to. It wasn't lonely. It was shared. On the 3rd evening, the birds stopped singing. Silas was in the barn, checking Big Red's shoes, when the mare's ears flicked toward the ridge. A low, rhythmic thudding began to vibrate through the floorboards. Hoofbeats, 4 of them, moving slow, confident. "Clara," Silas said, not raising his voice. She appeared from the shadows of the loft. The Sharps rifle held steady in her hands. She didn't look like a victim anymore. She looked like a survivor. "Get in the loft," Silas commanded. "Stay behind the hay bales. Don't fire until I draw my Colt. If I fall, you don't stop. You ride right out the back. You head for the fort. You don't look back." "Silas." "Go," he said. It wasn't a request. The riders stopped 20 yards from the stable. They were silhouetted against the rising moon, for men in long duster coats, their hats pulled low. The man in the lead was tall, with a beard that looked like it was made of wire. He rode a gray stallion that looked as mean as he did. "Thorne," the man shouted, "I know you're in there, old man. We ain't got a quarrel with you. We just want the property that wandered off our land." Silas stepped into the doorway. He didn't have a rifle in his hand. He just had his thumbs hooked in his gun belt. "Don't have no property here, Miller," Silas called back. "Just a guest. And my guests don't go nowhere they don't want to." Miller laughed. It was a dry, ugly sound. "You always were a fool, Silas. Thinking that piece of tin you wore 20 years ago still means something. This is a new West. We own the dirt. We own the law. And we own that girl." "You own the dirt, all right," Silas said, his voice dropping an octave. "About 6 feet of it. If you don't turn those horses around." Miller's hand drifted toward his holster. "Wait," Silas said, a ghost of a smile on his lips. "You want her? She's right here." Silas stepped back and gripped the heavy iron handles of the double stable doors. He tightened his grip, his muscles bunching under his coat. With a violent heave, the stable doors flew open. Miller expected a girl to come running out, begging for mercy. He didn't expect the 12-gauge shotgun Silas had rigged to a tripwire. The lead spray caught Miller's horse in the chest. The stallion reared, throwing the outlaw into the mud. "Now!" Silas roared. From the loft, the Sharp's rifle barked. A .50 caliber slug caught the second rider in the shoulder, spinning him out of his saddle like a rag doll. Silas didn't wait. He drew his Colt Navy in a blur of motion. The world slowed down. The smell of sulfur and wet will fill the air. He fired. The third rider slumped over his horse's neck. Miller was screaming in the mud, reaching for his pistol, but Silas was already there. He stepped out of the stable, the rain splashing against his face. He didn't look like an old rancher anymore. He looked like the vengeance of a forgotten god. He kicked the pistol out of Miller's hand. He looked down at the man who used iron chains on people. "You said you owned the law, Miller," Silas said, his voice calm. "But out here, I'm the only law there is." Miller looked up, his eyes filled with the realization that his money and his senator couldn't help him now. "Please, I can pay." Silas didn't answer. He looked up at the loft. Clara was standing there, the rifle still smoking. Her face was set in stone. She nodded once. Silas looked back at Miller. He didn't fire. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the rusted iron key Clara had been carrying, the one she'd taken from the camp. He dropped in the mud in front of Miller's face. "That key don't fit nothing no more," Silas said, "because the cage is gone." He turned his back on the man. It was the ultimate insult. He didn't even consider Miller a threat anymore. The sun rose the next morning over a valley that felt different. The air was scrubbed clean by the storm. The bodies were gone. Silas had hauled them to the crossroads for the marshal to find. He didn't care about the paperwork. He cared about the silence. Clara was standing on the porch of the house. She was wearing an old shirt of Silas's and a pair of trousers cinched with a rope. She looked at the horizon. "Where will you go?" Silas asked, leaning against the porch railing. "To the city," she said. "To the newspapers. This ledger needs to be read by people who aren't afraid of the Millers." Silas nodded. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small pouch of gold coins, the retirement he'd been saving for a rainy day. He pressed it into her hand. "Take Red," Silas said. "She's a good horse. She'll get you there." Clara looked at the gold, then at the man who had saved her life. She stepped forward and did something Silas hadn't expected. She hugged him. It was a brief moment, a flicker of humanity in a world made of iron and lead. "Thank you, Silas Thorne," she whispered. "Just keep riding, Clara," he said. "Don't look back." He watched her ride away until she was nothing more than a speck against the gold of the prairie. Then he walked back to his stable. He picked up the broom and started to sweep away the spent shells and the dried mud. He made coffee. Bitter, strong. He sat on a stool and looked at the stable doors. They were back on their hinges. The ranch was quiet again, but for the first time in 15 years, the quiet didn't feel like a prison. It felt like peace. Some stories end in blood. Some end in justice. But the best ones end with a man being able to look at his own reflection in a bucket of water without turning away. Silas Thorne remained in that valley. He never saw Clara again, but every month, a newspaper would arrive from the city detailing the trials of senators and the closing of slave camps in the mountains. He'd read them by the fire, sip his coffee, and nod to the empty room. What about you? Have you ever had to stand your ground when the doors flew open? Have you ever been the anchor for someone lost in the storm? If this story moved you, tap that like button. It helps us keep these tales of the Old West alive. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss our next journey into the heart of the